Colin Franco is going to talk about the Emulsions Task Force group, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm with the state of Rhode Island DOT. I've been there for a few years. I've also been with Ashton a number of committees, the Materials Committee, the Standing Committee on Research, and a few other subcommittees. But the best committee ever is what we're going to talk about today. It's a task force that was under the ETG. And what does that mean? Well, you'll hear about it soon. If Tom Van didn't say anything about the ETG, and Tom, I wasn't here. So the ETG was a task group that was established when preservation became sexy. I don't know when that was, but sometime in the maybe mid-1995, somewhere around there. And it was established by Jim Sorensen of the Federal Highway. Now, all those guys, who knew Jim? He's a guy who was and is sorely missed, because Jim was so passionate about this stuff. I mean, I'd get calls at night. In fact, I was going to Canada one time for I think it was for Canada Day or something like that, and it was a Friday, and I was driving late at night, and I get this call, come in, and I was driving through upstate New York, and I think you can't use a cell phone, and you couldn't at that time. So I had to tell him, hey Jim, I'm in New York, can't take your cell phone now, it's about 9 o'clock at night. He said, hey, to hell with them, there's no cops over there. So, but that was Jim. I mean, he lived for this stuff. And what was the ETG supposed to do? It was really to promote the concepts of preservation. Now we're talking, this is sometime in mid-95, preservation and all this stuff was still, getting its legs. But what he did was, in 2008, I'd been on the ETG for a few years before that. In 2008, I guess Jim, with a few of his peers from the industry and academia, got together and said, you know what? We need an emulsion task force, and you'll see the reason why. But a lot of the treatments we're using, especially in the flexible pavement side, is based on emulsions. Tom, do you agree? I'm going to put you on the spot today. Well, the ETG itself was, of course, the reason for being was to advance and improve the state of the practice, and it was really meant to be a very collaborative effort. And I say that because it did become a truly collaborative effort. And the goals of the ETG was really to accept and implement pavement preservation by states and local agencies. And I'll remind you again, this was sometime in mid-95, when those good old days that, the big boys in the HMA industry and the concrete guys wanted all their roads to be done with. Just leave the roads, turn them up again, put your HMA, go for another 20 years and keep doing the same stuff. Preservation wasn't, there was a lot of pushback on the preservation at that time. And the other thing was identify and address stakeholder needs. Who are the stakeholders? Pretty much the cities and towns and the state DOTs. And you can read the rest. So the working agenda that we had in the ETG was to push preservation, training and certification, and I'm sure you heard a lot about that, maybe this morning, but definitely towards this afternoon. Advanced research, well, that's what you just heard from Ben and company, and there's a lot more research going on, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that from the NCHRP level. And the impacts of new policies on preservation and implementation. And I'd like to say that I think in the last bill, it was the first time that preservation was mentioned. Thanks to them. And that's important, because if things are going to move on a national level, it needs to be highlighted somewhere up there, either on a bill or a federal highway coming out as a major policy. And advance new treatments and technologies. And the most important thing, they sanctioned the support for the Emulsion Task Force. So we were, like I said, I like to have birthdays, but no RIPs. So that's when we were conceived, I think, in April of 2008. I think it was in Phoenix, Arizona. We all were sitting there under the bright sky, and Jim says, okay, we're going to have this task force, Colin, you're it, with Roger Hayner. So that's how it began. Okay, a little pavement management. That's the typical deterioration curve. You can put any number of years you want to your pavements in your neck of the woods. But typically after about, like in our neck of the woods, and Joe Lima, is Joe here? Oh, Joe's there. Joe, raise your hand. Come on, I can't see you. Jeez, it's my eyes. But we worked very closely together. Joe was working with me at that time, and we started the program in Rhode Island. I think it was 98, right, Joe? Crack seal, yeah. But this is your typical deterioration curve. In the past, the way things were funded by federal highway, you could only use federal money for anything that was called a rehab or a reconstruction. So all you see that there, is there a, oh yeah, good. We could get funded, well, if you had your own money as states, you all could do whatever you all wanted here, but typically you built your road, it went down to somewhere there, and when it came time to rebuild, you got more federal money to rebuild the road, and that was it. Now with the passing of, I think it was Ice-T, right, Tom? Where you could have preservation programmed and funded. That's what the feds came up with, and you could get funding for doing work in this area, which was really preservation. So having said that, if you look at this here, my estimate is about 70% of the treatments are with emulsions in flexible pavement preservation. Now, some people can argue they could say all our chip seals are done with hot binders and stuff like that, but really about 60 to 70% is with all these treatments that can be applied here and maybe a little bit in that zone. So when you see that, you see the importance of emulsions for preserving our pavements, especially the flexible pavements. However, so what we were told, or what we were given, the mandate, and I say it's a mandate, this was Jim Sorensen's edict, actually. Advance the effort to develop performance-based method specifications, methods and specifications, I'm sorry, my eyes are a little wonky, but basically we want to go from the old method specs to the performance-based specifications for emulsions. And we had to come up with, typically the AASHTO format for standards and specifications is you have a material spec, and if you have a treatment, it's a design practice. The material specs are the M something, a number. The design practice is an R something number. And then we had to come up with protocols for performance, which were best practices. And then we added another one, construction guide specs. And I'll tell you why those are important. And then the last thing we were supposed to do is come up with protocols for inspection and acceptance, or QA. The second one was trying to encourage adoption of uniform national standards. Now, they'll be going back to 2008, but prior to that, there was a lot of specific. If you went to a state spec, and you went to the state that was next door, you'd see the same spec, say for chip seal, and there'd be two different specs. There was no national or consistent spec for these treatments. In fact, there were no AASHTO specs either. Federal Highway, I think, had a semblance of a spec, but there were really no national specs. Pretty much people relied on industry or past practices legacy specifications, if you will. But there were no nationally accepted specifications. And this was a big issue. Develop a performance specification and design standards for all treatments. That's what I'm going to show you. And work with the ETG to facilitate the adoption of emulsion treatments. In other words, work with the ETG to market these treatments once these specifications and standards got done. The current membership, well, I've been there since 2008 on this committee. We had Roger Hayner, who was co-chair. Now we have Chris Lubers from Creighton. And this committee really has members from, the stakeholders are from all over. We are really well represented. Industry, you can see IMA, ERA, ISA, FP Squared. We have the academics from Colorado State University, Texas, Scott Schuler, if you all know him, Texas A&M, Amy Epps Martin. The University of Wisconsin is Hussein Bahir, and NC State is Dr. Kim. And then the state DOT is represented at Texas, Indiana, ourselves, Nevada, and Minnesota. Federal Highway Lands is with us too, and Federal Highway, Jason Dietz. And then the National Center, Larry Galehouse and company are part of the group. Within this ETF, we have actually 6 working groups. As you can see, residue and recovery. So basically your emulsions, how you get the residue and what sort of testing you do on them. The design group is for the design of the treatments, and you'll see the treatments coming on a little later. Supply certification and quality assurance, and Larry and Todd Shields. Recycling with using emulsions, Todd Thomas. And research, Darren Hazlett. For the first couple of years, we had the 5 groups, and then we realized that as we were coming up with specifications and the like, we needed a group just for the emulsion binders to coordinate all the binders for the treatments and come up with a binder group, which we call the Special Working Group, which is under Mike Voth of Federal Lands. So, these are some of the products we delivered. In 2010, we submitted 4 AASHTO standards. They've all been approved. Some of them are, well, 1 was tabled, but 3 of them have been approved. I'm not sure whether they're provisionals or no, they've been sent to permanent, or they made full standards. Is Derek here? Derek, you're going to inherit some of this stuff. Well, Derek is going to be the chair or subcommittee, the chair of Tech Section 5B in the AASHTO materials grouping, which will take care. Actually, they're the ones who are going to review the newest standards that we are producing. So I'll be nice to you, Derek. 2011, 6 standards were sent to the subcommittee on materials. We've tabled them because as these came out, the subcommittees were working on actual standards for chip seals, and these were basically chip seal standards. So this will have to be moved forward at some time. There was also a best practices document, which would be a precursor to coming up with construction guide specs. And these were done for chip seal and microsurfacing. And also talk a little bit more about on these things from the NCHRP project that's going on now. And there was a low temperature residue recovery method, which is a full standard. We had a kind of once Jim Sorensen passed in 2009, there was a kind of a lull in our activity, some funding issues and people not being able to get together. So we kind of resuscitated the effort in 2013, and with a renewed sense of mission. And we said we got to get something going, actually advance the effort to develop performance-based specifications. And for that reason, we decided to go with the AASHTO, like I said before, start developing standards in AASHTO format for AASHTO acceptance. See, all the states pretty much use either AASHTO or ASTM for most of their specifications. And like in the state of Rhode Island, we typically use AASHTO first and then the ASTM methods. Not only that, I mean, AASHTO is us. So this is what we came up with. We said, let's develop material specs, test methods, design practices, and construction guide specs. Why the push on this? The thing it hit us was, I mean, we can come up with all sorts of research on chip seals and microsurfacings, and we can go and hear stories and war stories on how things are put down and how things are successful or not. But the bottom line is when a state design engineer, and I use the word design for actually the person who deals with project development. How many guys from the States over here? I mean, you guys will understand what I'm saying. The person who develops a project, if he's not or she is not a preservation or a maintenance person, would have hardly heard of these terms like chip seals, micro, and so on and so forth. So if that person has to develop a project, the first thing they're going to ask you is, where are the specs? Or where are the test methods? And well, before that, obviously, you've got to have some sort of a project selection. How do you select a project? For the STIP, who knows what that is? All states have to have that. The Transportation Improvement Program, that has to be approved by the Federal Highway and the states before projects get to be set in stone, if you will. So typically, projects for these treatments come out from a pavement management system, and if that is not mature enough, it's really the experience of some of the older folks, the maintenance folks typically. Then it would go to the design or project design engineer or the project developer, if you will, because contracts, most of this work that's done, I know there's a lot of states that do some in-house work with their maintenance forces, but most of this you'll see will be going out to be contracted. And so the project developer will say, where are the standards, where are the specs? And so that's the reason why we went into that full bore. And like I said before, you need material specifications, materials design practices for those treatments that lend themselves to design. The next thing is construction guide standards, get them uniformed, and we call them guide because we understand that different parts of the country, because of weather limitations or maybe even practices, construction practices, they could be a little different in the way things are done in Minnesota and how we do them in Rhode Island or Texas versus Florida, for instance. So this is going to be a modular type of thing where the construction guide specifications are going to be like for the materials part, the construction part, the QA, and how the methods of measurement, et cetera, are going to be modularized to fit the different conditions in the country. And then the final one is quality assurance. I mean, I don't think any state can let out a contract without saying how they're going to monitor, supervise, or for that matter, test the materials that are going down. We want to make sure we're getting what we pay for. And quality assurance is the acceptance decision. That's what the state does, or the agency or the consultant hired by the state, to make sure that what they get is what is in accordance with specs. Quality control, that's what the contractor is and has to do. Independent assurance, that's another requirement for the states to do, and along with that goes certification. So these are the treatments that we've been talking about: chip seals, microtack, fog, scrub, sand, slurry seals. There's also the foam asphalt stabilization that's used in recycled material, typically for recycling, bonded surface treatments, gold mixes. Again, some are virgin mixes, recycled and cold in place. So what have we gotten so far? Submitted this microsurfacing and chip. By the way, we did some surveys. We surveyed the states, and pretty much everyone said, oh, they'd like to see, this is the most popular, the most commonly used treatments would be the microsurfacing and the chip seal. So we decided to start with, to work on those first. And I'm happy to say that the material spec and the design practices for those two are already in AASHTO format. They're already out. So states, if you all want to start your projects, grab the AASHTO specs and start reviewing what's in there and put them down into your contract documents. The construction guide spec. 2 years ago, we sent in a problem statement. It got accepted. I'm on the panel for this. It's an NCHRP project. It's a $150,000 project, and we expect that the contractor has been selected, and we expect this to be done by sometime by August next year. The best practices which would go along with all these has yet to be, there's a draft for it, but it has yet to be published. We're still trying to find a place to send it to so that they can publish it with some authority. We also worked on the binder specifications. These are being revised, M140, M208, and 316. This is on the binder itself, and these are now going to, they were standards already, the revised versions were made into standards in 2016. The three next standards, the slurry, fog, and cold-in-place recycling. This was vetted by AASHTO last year, which was sent to ballot. I'm glad to say that everything has gone through, and these are going to be published the next time around, which should be in the summer of 2017. So we're going to have 6 new specs in AASHTO format by August, I would think. Construction guide specs, we still have to get an NCHR project or something similar to that to work on those. The next ones we're concentrating on are the TAC and the slurries. These are still drafts with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Materials, and we'd expect them to be voted on sometime maybe in September or maybe in December, but I'm hoping that they're going to be specs by next year, at least next year in August or so. So what's left? Complete drafting of 3 more standards, like I've mentioned before, the sand seal, the scrub seal, and the bonded overlays. The QA protocols for emulsions. I mean, we can have all the standards, all the specs, all the contract documents in the world, but if you don't have QA, you're not going to get what you want, more than likely. So QA is absolutely critical, good quality assurance on anything we put down. And we're starting with this, with the micro and the chip seal. And like I've said before, that's part of the, where did I miss that? That's part of the construction guide specs that is with the NCHRP. Research, studies, updates. We've got Darren Hazlett from Texas. He's our chair. We're always looking for ideas. So folks, if you have ideas, you can send them to me. We can send it through the ETF, or you can send it to your state research engineer too. But we need some ideas for research. There's also a pavement preservation research roadmap that was done by Sorensen way back when. I think it's still there on the website. Long-term, I say long-term plans, this is kind of, I hope it's not too long because we need those QA protocols worked on. We are working on them, like I said, but the rest of the treatments need to have their protocols worked on too. And developing an SPG specification. What we're trying to do is, that's a biggie. That's one of those original mandates we had, is try to get some sort of a unified performance-graded emulsion binder specification. Work was done by Professor Kim at NC State, Dr. Amy Epps at Texas A&M, and Gail King, who's a consultant for federal lands. all these folks have done a lot of work, and I'm sure people are here also must have heard of other work being done, but we're trying to gather all those together and come up with a kind of a unified specification. So far, the first step was to develop something for chip seals, and that is going on. We've had a couple of meetings on that, and in 2 weeks' time, we are meeting again, and that's going to be a major topic of discussion. So, research, we've got to kind of try and get some NCHRP funding, pool funding, like Ben and company was successful in getting with Min Road and Lee Road. And the next thing is really to promote all these technologies that have been, or the deliverables that we've come up with. I mean, we hope that states would start accepting them, putting them into their contract documents. Emulsions, the QA program for emulsions, acceptance, like I said, is going to be done by the agency, QC by the contractor, independent assurance by the agency. And also as new binders or new processes get developed in this business, there has to be some form of acceptance either by the NEPPP program, which is the National Transportation Product Evaluation Program, or something of the like, because when things get manufactured and a manufacturer tries to get it done, tries to get acceptance of the products to the individual states, that's going to be tough. You've got to hit at least the 50 or 51 entities that make up the AASHTO states. Material certification, that's something that's being worked on. So agency acceptance plans, QC, contractor QC plans for the work that's going to be done, and vendor supplied materials and certification. These we are working on to come up with some of the tenets for those certifications. People don't really talk much about this, but when they say quality assurance, people think in terms of materials tests, supervision, but really a lot of it has got to do with workmanship. I mean, how do you know the sprayer is spraying the right amount of liquid? Is the temperature the right temperature? Is the substrate done right? All these things affect the product. It's not only the materials properties that affect the outcome of the job, it's really the majority of it, and in fact there's some folks have put some numbers to it. It's like 10% of the quality of a job depends on design, 20% on materials, 70% on workmanship. And I believe that after all these years of seeing stuff go down, and why do we have the problems we have? It's really people, contractors not paying attention to for the most part, not all the time, not paying attention to detail. Education and training, that's absolutely critical, and I think something was said about that today, so I won't say anything more, but that's got to be crucial. We've got to get trained people doing the work. And Larry Galehouse has taken the lead on that, and I think, as you've seen before, there's been quite a few folks trained out in the West, but I think we need it here, and I think somehow we've got to get it combined to our NETTCP, the program we have for soils and concrete and asphalt hot mix. The development of the SPG specification, I may have jumped a little bit, but Mike Worth from Federal Lands is leading the effort. He's part of ETF. And Darren Hazlett, Dr. Kim, and Gail King are pushing this work. Texas already has a spec that it hasn't passed anything. It's been sent to the SOM, the Subcommittee on Materials. So we're waiting to see what happens with that. But we are Dr. Amy Apso is the one who came up with that with Darren. So we are working, obviously the spec that we are working with, we'll incorporate a few of the tenets of that spec. So what do we hope to accomplish at the end of it all? Well, we hope to have standards, ASHTO standards for all treatments, like I've showed you. have QA protocols for each emulsion treatment, definitely education and training, and certification of agency and contractor personnel. And the big one, develop a SPG, or performance-graded emulsion spec. The next thing, once we have this, we've got to have a way to get them marketed or push the agenda to make sure that they are used in preservation, and I think that's something we, as the ETF, are going to be talking about in a couple of weeks. I should have mentioned this first. The ETF was first, well, when we were conceived, it was under the ETG, which was Federal Highway sponsored. Now we are an AASHTO, we are under the TSP2 AASHTO program. Don't ask me what TSP2 now is, you should have asked me in the morning, but we're getting funding from them. And so I think we are on solid ground for that for the next 3 years. And the ETF is through an all volunteer. No one is getting paid to draft specifications or come up with any protocols that we've delivered. So it's all volunteer.
I had to guess when we'd finally have a performance grade spec for emulsions. 2 years, 5 years? What's your guess?
This hair will be grayer than gray, but it's going to be a stepwise thing, I think, concentrating on the chip seals and the microsurfacings. What would we require for that? And then work on the rest. So it'll be a kind of a continuous development, because we got to know we got to come up with what are the metrics or parameters that we need for the performance of those, for the binder for those treatments. So they've got it pretty good for chip seal. For the microsurfacing, it's still, they've got a lot of it because there's a huge study done in the late 90s. There was $1 million study by California, Texas, and the like, where they did a lot of research on microsurfacing. So they've got the parameters for that. But putting it together is going to be a challenge. So I would say in 2-3 years, we should have the start of a spec, and that'll be it. Then all the rest of the treatment requirements will be added onto that. So that could, I wouldn't want to venture a guess on that. Anyone else? Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Colin.
Yep.
All right.